Hey everyone, welcome to the Udacity Full Stack Web Developer Nano Degree weekly webinar. Today we're doing week 12 where we discuss security in Linux servers, we discuss ports, and we discuss secure shell. So we'll start off with the Linux servers. So far in this course, you've probably spent a fair amount of time with Python's built-in servers. So they're great for learning how to build applications, and they work quite well. The problem is that they can't handle a large amount of functionality. They're not really built for that. So right now, you're going to have to start looking at a production ready or a production scale solution for your application. And predominantly, you would probably go for Apache or Nginx. The Udacity course will use Apache. These are both Linux servers. So basically, servers that are not run by, some company like Microsoft. Anybody can use them. They're open source, and they handle incredibly large amounts of traffic. And yeah, you basically really need to get familiar with those for your application. So while you have, it's not incredibly important until you got an application, until it is really important. So it's best to learn it the sooner than later. Essentially, what you get used to is just learning how to configure them, which is something you don't really need to do with your Python servers. They essentially just worked out of the box. So the reason I keep saying Python servers is because Python 2 and Python 3 have different servers. So I just want to make a point of that. I know that sometimes people get confused. They learn, they're learning so many new things. They're learning the Python programming language, or they're learning programming to start, and then they're learning web development, and then learning about the front end, the back end, and all of these different things, and then they get confused because they can't remember exactly if they were using Python 2 or 3, and they assume that maybe they were learning simple HTTP server, and then all of a sudden that's not there anymore. So yeah, I'm just emphasizing this point, and that's that simple HTTP server is the library you use for Python 2. So hopefully you're not using that, as it's going to stop being supported next year, 2020. That's officially from the Python Foundation. So what you want to use, even though you want to move towards a production Linux server, HTTP server is fantastic still for development and for learning. So yeah, I think you want to slowly move away from simple HTTP server, which is Python 2. Okay, so if you do need to make your application swap over, then I've included in the screenshot the command that you would use. But yeah, don't do that unless you really have to. So Udacity will be in this course, you'll be configuring an Apache server, but I just want to point out that there is also Nginx, which is far more new. It's built by a Russian gentleman. Can't remember his name. I could Google it, but I guess you can as well. And it's taken a large share away from Apache. I mean, Apache is still the most dominant Linux web server out there, I think together both of them make up over 50% of the serve over 50% of the traffic on the internet. So it's ridiculous amounts of data. Um, so I just wanted to put these thoughts into your mind, right from the beginning. Although it won't be incredibly important for your project that you're doing, but as a web developer, you want to start thinking about these things. Um, when choosing between Apache and Nginx, sometimes it really just doesn't matter. So you'll use, if you're looking for a job, you want to be able to use both so that whoever you work for, depending on which one they use, you're able to work with it. But essentially, it's going to come down to concurrency and scalability, and then security, but not really security of the um, Apache and Nginx, but security of the application, how it works, and what kind of data it serves, and that will affect the security and which of the two choices are better for the application. So maybe without going into it, one thing to maybe keep in mind is that if you have a lot of concurrency, so large amounts of requests at the exact same time, and then maybe a little less traffic later, so inconsistent requests that need to be served, but when there are requests, they are large amounts, then Nginx is probably your best choice. And then another thing to keep in mind is that it's probably useful to, or what often happens is that Nginx is used with Apache. So Nginx is almost like a buffer for when you have these spikes in traffic. So essentially, what's most important is getting familiar with the configuration files. And there's so many tutorials on this that I'm not going to replicate exactly what Udacity does or what a lot of people do really, really well. But I would say that the important thing that maybe hasn't been explained super clearly to you guys, but hopefully that you'll take away from this, is that all you really want to know is where to find the configuration file for your Apache system, what it is you're actually configuring, so essentially just changing ports, which you'll get to shortly, and understanding how to do this. Again, it's just repetition. Configure a whole bunch of different or change the configuration files of your server a couple of times, and you'll see that it's just a format, an arbitrary, maybe not arbitrary, it feels arbitrary, but just figure out how to, or just follow, and maybe follow different tutorials, just so you get a feel for exactly what it is that you're doing when you configure your server. There's not too much. The server does the work. Most of the time, you've already done the, you've built your time is spent with your application, and just getting your server to run can be incredibly frustrating if you're not too sure what it is that you're supposed to know, or what it is you're actually doing. It just may seem like a black box. So the fastest way to resolve the kind of problems that you may have is just to take one step back and think, what exactly is this server? All it is doing is handling the requests and the responses that your application is already designed for. And it'll be relatively generic. It's done 1,000 times a day by 1,000 different people on 1,000 different, or maybe millions, by a million different people on a million different applications every single day. It's just a couple of settings in the configuration files for Apache or Nginx. So you want to be going and doing tutorials. First, the tutorials in the configuring Linux web servers Udacity course, and then just go through some of the DigitalOcean ones and just start seeing the pattern. Just see exactly what file you need to change and why you're changing it, and where it is in the Linux file system. And if you just spend time on that, maybe do that before you even start your project, so that you don't mix up, fixing up your project with configuring a web server. So if you just go do those tutorials a few times, or practice doing it, then you'll master this very quickly. Then ports are incredibly important to understand, but there's not too much to it. Essentially, it's just the range of ports on your I want to say virtual machine because that's what you're using, but on the operating system where your application will lie, or at the very least where your server will lie, and understanding which ports are supporting which type of functionality. So what you really want to do is you don't have to memorize them, although essentially when you're working with it, you'll start to memorize them anyway. You really want to figure out that HTTP is on 80, port 80, and HTTPS is 443, and then for email, you want, see, I didn't include RMAP, but RMAP, SMTP, and POP3. So SMTP is for sending mails, POP3 is for retrieving the mails, and then for file transfer, FTP. There's not too much to this. You just, when you're configuring this server, what you're really doing when you're changing those settings, one of the main things you're going to be doing is closing certain ports and allowing other ports. So that's where these two tie together. These are the ports that you're going to be opening and closing when you're changing the settings for your web server, your Linux server. So yeah, there's not too much to it. It can cause a nightmare if you don't really know what each of these do, and you don't know which ones, which ports you're keeping open or closing when you're setting up. And then it can also be a security nightmare. You can do things like lock yourself out of your server. That's why it's so fantastic to use a virtual machine that you can just destroy when you log yourself out of it. So yeah, but there's not too much to it. I guess, yeah, we'll leave it at that. And then lastly, secure shell. So SSH is, I guess we can just talk about why it even exists. So I think that confuses a lot of people. And essentially, if you have a connection to a computer or to a server, and you have people, some, especially the I don't want to say the heart of your application, because every single part is really important from your back end to your front end. But with your server, where all of the connections are taking place, every single request is being served by your server, obviously. You want to keep this incredibly secure, and passwords are just they come with a whole bunch of different headaches. You have to store everyone's password. You have to deal with people trying to break in, so a whole bunch of fake passwords that you have to start storing. There's just a myriad of complications that come with passwords, storing passwords and managing them, and that's where Secure Shell comes in. Essentially what you do, which I'm not too sure if you've done it yet in the course, in the Udacity course, but basically what you'll be doing is having a public and a private key. And there's a Udacity course that I think it's CS 220. Let me actually Google it for you guys, because it's not super important, but basically it's the Intro to Computer Science. It's one of the first courses that Udacity ever did, and in there they go into hash tables, which in Python are dictionaries, or dictionaries are a type of hash table, which basically is just a way to store key and value pairs. I hope I'm not, this is a long way around in explaining it, but then hopefully you clearly understand, and don't need to memorize anything. And basically, this course will explain to you exactly how that works. And that's what it explains exactly what hashing is. And the way that hashes are often stored is through some sort of calculation. And these calculations, there's plenty of them. So um, can't remember them offhand, but say SHA, I think they discussed them in your Udacity course anyway, SHA 256, and a whole bunch of different hashing algorithms. And they're incredibly hard to decrypt. And so SSH just takes advantage of this. So you build an arbitrary uh, public and private key, and a hashing algorithm on the server does the um, encrypting of this, or the decrypting of the key, and this way it's able to verify that you are who you say you are, and that makes the connection secure. So it's just incredibly uh, useful. The problem is, you're going to have to set up a secret key on all of the computers you use, so it's not that great for normal users logging into, say, applications. So you don't have SSH with yourself and, say, Google for your email. But, so for example, with GitHub, you will have that where you're constantly sending data. You can SSH. I'm sure you've seen that with GitHub, that's one of the ways to transfer your data up to GitHub is through SSH. So, yeah, it's just incredibly useful to set up SSH on your server when you're configuring it, just so that it knows who is secure and not, and you don't have to worry about passwords. It's a fantastic thing to learn for a whole range of different applications in full stack development. So yeah, hopefully we've covered each of these to a useful amount of detail, but looking at them all differently to how it's been presented in the coursework. And yeah, if you don't have any questions, let me just double check. There's no questions. Yeah, and so yeah, we'll leave it at that then. Hopefully you guys are progressing nicely in your nano degree, coming up to the end soon. And yeah, just send me any messages if you have any questions on the Slack channel. Thank you.